Let's take a minute to review the material we just learned. And what we've been learning is that when we have multiple CSS rule sets, so CSS rule set has a selector, and then it has the declaration block, and then declaration. So when we have multiple CSS rule sets targeting the same element, which of the declarations are going to be applied to that element? And the answer is all of those declarations will be applied to that element unless some of those declarations are conflicting. Well, if there are conflicting declarations in the different rule sets targeting a certain element, how do we know which of those conflicting declarations is applied? The first criteria browsers use to determine which declaration is applied when you have conflicting declarations is what is the CSS specificity value of that declaration, right? So it looks to the rule set, looks to the selector, calculates the CSS specificity value, and the declaration which has the highest CSS specificity value is the declaration which is going to win the day and be applied to that element. If the CSS specificity values between conflicting declarations is the same, if it has the same CSS specificity value, then the last declaration applied, right, is the one that's going to win the day and will be applied to that element. So we look to the CSS specificity value first, and then if they're equal between conflicting declarations, we look to the order, and the last declaration applied is the one that goes and is applied to the CSS, to the HTML element. So that's the main takeaway from this section. If you got that, great, you're golden. That's what you need to get. Some additional things which we learned in this section is we learned that browsers have rendering engines, and those rendering engines, there are different browsers out there with different rendering engines, so it's just good to be aware of because you'll hear things like WebKit or Trident, or you'll hear about like the Gecko rendering engine. So all these different rendering engines right here, WebKit, Blink, Gecko, Trident, Edge HTML, you'll hear about those. So when you hear WebKit, think Safari. When you hear Blink, think Chrome, Opera, Amazon Silk. Right? Those are the browsers which use this rendering engine. And often you'll hear WebKit referring to all of these browsers right here. So all four of them. And Gecko is Firefox. So different rendering engines render the page in different ways, but the main principles of what we've learned of specificity and order apply equally to all of them. Even if they implement how they render in slightly different ways, the implementation can be different, but the use is the same. I don't know if that makes sense. And so that's something else important that we learned. And then we also added to our list of all these things we've been learning. So here are all of the HTML tags we've learned so far. We haven't added any new tags, but we did get this thing with tag attributes, where one tag can have two classes applied to it. So we learned that this section, so I added that in. And then we also saw font style and font style italic, so I added that in here to all the CSS properties we've learned so far. So that's how you italicize text. And we're going to learn more about text very soon. And then we also learned about compound selectors, CSS selectors. And so here we have like, UL that has the ID of summer drinks. This would be a UL. This would be an element which has the ID of summer drinks, which is a descendant of a UL because there's a space there. But without that space, it's a UL that has the ID of summer drinks. So we learned about compound selectors. And then the last thing is you want to know, just like, straight looking at the page, how to calculate CSS specificity. So an element is a 1, an ID is 100, a class is a 10, right? So you just need to know that. And then you can look at it and say, okay, this has a value of 1, 101, 2, 102. This has a value of 10, 11, 111, 112. This has a value of 10, 11, 111, 112, 113, 114. So you want to be able to do that. So you learned a lot of really good things in this section. You're doing great. Keep it up. Just keep going. This is the pathway. If you have an interest in this, if you enjoy it, you are learning the best fundamentals for HTML and CSS anywhere in the world. There's a lot of people who are working programmers building websites who don't know the stuff you've already learned. So keep it up. You're doing great. And we've got more great stuff to come, and we're getting really close to the point where we're going to be able to build awesome web pages. So that's coming soon.